You got evolution versus science. This poster was hanging by the kiosk, and a student comes walking by and says, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, how can you have evolution versus science when evolution is science?" And I asked, "Well, what do you mean by science?" And he said, "Well, like experiments in the lab." And I said, "Oh, the type of science that's observable, testable, repeatable, falsifiable, the scientific method type of science." And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, evolution's none of that." And he said, "Well, sure it is." And I said, "Okay, well, name an experiment that tests evolution." And he goes, "Well, there's lots of things." And I said, "Well, just give me your best thing." And I've seen dozens of talks on debates on this subject, and typically when a college professor is asked for the best evidence of evolution, he points to something outside of his field. You know, the biologist will point to geology, the geologist will point to astronomy, the astronomer will point to genetics, and the geneticist will point to geology. It's this big shell game. What that's telling me is they know the best evidence isn't in their field. And so the student in front of me, he says, "Geology," as if that answered the question. I said, "Well, what evidence does geology have to promote evolution?" And he said, "The geologic column." And I said, "You gotta be kidding me. Layers of sedimentary rock all over the world, by the way, laid down by water, by the way, proves that we came from a rock?" I said, "That could just as easily point to a flood, a worldwide flood in the days of Noah." And we go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it's kind of like mental chess. And at one point he says, "Well, what makes the most sense?" And I said, "Exactly. That you were created by God, or that you came from hydrogen and helium." And we keep going back and forth, and towards the end, when it's about ready to walk away, he says, "You know what, I'm going to think about this." And that's not a stalemate, folks. That's a huge victory. We have a college student that's going to think for himself. Praise God for that. That's a hallelujah moment right there. And see, our education system does a terrible job at teaching students how to think. They really do. I mean, teaches them what to think. It's like that saying, the definition of college, it's where you go to look different but think the same. And it never used to be that way. I mean, our education system, 100 years ago, they were teaching Latin and Greek in high school. Today we're teaching remedial English in college. This is Thomas Chamberlain. He's the president of the Chicago Academy of Sciences. And he was the president of the University of Chicago, the first head of the geology department. Also, at the University of Chicago, he was the president of Wisconsin. And he warned researchers not to let one hypothesis dominate their thinking. Why is that? He said you should always have multiple hypotheses so that students can compare and contrast. They can sharpen their analytical skills. Otherwise, he said, if you don't, they're going to memorize and conform. And I spend a lot of time here at St. Cloud State. You know what I see? A whole lot of memorizing and conforming. And so since our government education doesn't teach people how to think critically, you're in luck. I'm going to do it tonight. Critical Thinking 101. All you need are 4 questions. First question is, how do you know that? Okay, everybody, let's repeat that. I want you to hear yourself say it on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
How do you know that?
Good. A little louder.
How do you know that?
Very good. How do you know that? If somebody's making extraordinary claims, they should have extraordinary evidence, right? Next question is kind of a follow-up to it. Can you verify that? In your science textbook right here, last spring we went through a dinosaur talk. In this textbook it says, separate the facts from the conclusions. A fact is a verifiable piece of information, where a conclusion is a judgment based upon the fact. And we did the whole talk. I got a YouTube channel called Solidify Your Faith, and the talk was titled Dinosaurs, Facts versus Fiction. We talked a lot about what's verifiable about dinosaurs. What's verifiable? There's bones in the dirt. What's a conclusion or an interpretation? Millions of years. And you can see that on YouTube if you like. Another question is, has this ever been observed? It's a real good question for evolution. Has it been observed, or is this just somebody's imagination? And then the final question is, are you making any assumptions? Now, if you hear of anybody using millions or billions of years, they're using assumptions, because that dating method is based on assumptions. It's full of assumptions. And there's 3 unknowable assumptions for the dating method. 1, they don't know the initial condition of the rock. 2, they don't know if the decay rate's been constant for millions of years. 3, they don't know if the specimen's been contaminated. What's going to contaminate it? Water. You think a worldwide flood might contaminate some specimens? So again, those are the critical thinking questions. Now let's just see, what would you do if you heard somebody like this? This is Dr. Lawrence Krauss. He's one of the premier evolutionists in the world. He's being grooved, I believe, to take Richard Dawkins' place. But listen to what he says.
The amazing thing is that every atom in your body came from a star that exploded. And the atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand. It really is the most poetic thing I know about physics. You are all stardust. You couldn't be here if stars hadn't exploded, because the elements, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, all the things that matter for evolution, weren't created at the beginning of time. They're created in the nuclear furnaces of stars, and the only way they can get into your body is if the stars were kind enough to explode. So forget Jesus. The stars died so that you could be here today. Okay? And anyway, this is great.
Listen to that response. Comments? Questions? How many people would say, no, he's a PhD, I'm going to believe what he says. Anybody like that? Does anybody? I saw a hand. Did you have a question that you would ask?
Is he saying that we made all the stars?
That's what he's saying. All right. Do we have any critical questions that we could ask him? Anybody?
How do you know that?
How do you know that? Exactly. Exactly. Any other ones? Can you verify that? No, I can't verify that. What else? Has it ever been observed? No. And is he making any assumptions? He's making a huge assumption. Anybody know what it is? A huge assumption. I'll give you a hint.
Some lone star managed to make its way to Earth.
Right. But his main assumption is there's no God. That's his assumption. And without God, he's painted himself into a corner. And we're going to cover why that is. But let's define some terms real quickly. Who'd like to take a stab at science? Who'd like to try to define science? You know, a lot of people think it's observation and testing, right? The scientific method type of science. But take a look at the textbook. It says scientific knowledge is limited to physical explanations for observable events in the natural world. Okay, physical explanations. The interesting thing about that is I'm using a non-physical idea to tell you that all there is physical explanations. It's an inconsistent worldview. And what else did they do with that sentence? They just kicked God out of the equation. You can't even look at that. They defined God out of the equation. That's your general ed textbook. General eds are more social programming than anything else. They want you to have an atheistic worldview here. That's what they're promoting. Okay, and then this is high school textbook. What does it say here? One goal of science is to provide natural explanations for events in the natural world. Again, what did they do? They just excluded the supernatural. They just excluded God. So I've got a question. So basically, you got this godless environment, this natural world. You can only look inside the box, all right? But what if the answer is outside the box? You're never going to find it in here, will you? It's like if I filled this up with millions of dollars worth of gold coins, and I hide it outside, and I tell you, you got all night to look for it, but you can't leave Atwood. Will you ever find it? No. No, you won't. So I got a question for this. You know, if science is the attempt to find the best naturalistic explanation for things, but what if the supernatural explanation is true and fits the data better? Yeah, what if all the data points to a creator? What are they going to do? Well, this atheist was honest enough to admit it. He says, even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such an hypothesis is excluded from science because it's not naturalistic. Everything could point to the supernatural, but they're going to close their eyes and plug their ears and say, no, we ain't going that way. They have a commitment to naturalism, and it doesn't matter what they find. They're not going to open the door to God. And this guy says it too, an evolutionist. Evolution is a theory universally accepted, not because it can be proven by logical, coherent evidence to be true. That's true. But because the only alternative, special creation, is clearly incredible. It's a horrible theory, but they don't have anything to replace it with besides creation, and they don't want to do that. Okay, so what's happening in our government education system on this campus? Hear no creator, see no creators, speak no creator. All right? And this happened to my brother-in-law. He had a geology class here. We majored in hydrology, so we had a geology class, and for a week they're trying to figure out how the Grand Canyon formed. And for a week they couldn't figure it out. There's about 12 theories, none of them worked. And then on Friday the professor says, there's one theory we haven't talked about. Anybody know what it is? The student raised his hand and said, Noah's flood. And the professor, get real quiet in the class. The professor said, you're right, but we can't talk about it. So they censored even thinking down that line. And because it's censored in the classroom, guess what, folks? We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it on October 19th here in Atwood. You can come and see the biblical explanation for the Grand Canyon, and this theory works. Every feature is explainable. And we're going to be touching on Walt Brown's hydroplate theory. There's a book down there. He's got one assumption that explains 25 major features on Earth and in the solar system, and he makes accurate predictions with that. You know what he predicted? When we find out what's in a comet, He said there's going to be Olivine, and he was right. He's made other predictions that have been right based on this model, on a young Earth model, by the way. Okay, definition number 2, how about evolution? And you can say, well, we observe evolution, and that's true. Microevolution, variation within a kind. You get different kinds of dogs, wolf, dog, coyote, they're all the same kind of dog. And there's variations within a kind, but there's limits. You know, just because a horse can jump over the fence, and he can jump a little higher, he's not going to jump over the moon, right? There's limits to how high you can jump, and there's limits how far a species can change. And so watch out for this. We're going to come back to this for logical fallacy. They'll say, because you believe in big dogs and little dogs evolving, you believe that we came from the goo. Goo to you by way of the zoo. No, that's totally different. Two totally different meanings of evolution. One is scientific, that we can observe. I call it adaptation with a kind. They call it microevolution. And then there's macroevolution. That's where you get big jumps. That's where you get molecules turning into man. Amoeba turning into an elephant. Bacteria turning into a blue whale. See, everything came from a common descent according to that theory, but it's never been observed. And now I'd like to introduce you to Spike Pizarris. Okay, he's got 3 videos out there. They're all titled, What You're Not Being Taught About Astronomy. Volume 1 is the solar system. Volume 2 is stars and galaxies. And Volume 3 is the universe. And he goes through and just rips apart that atheistic theory. Without God, it can't work according to the laws of physics. And I was blessed enough to hear him speak at the Twin Cities Creation Science Association meeting last summer. And they invited me to come early so I could eat with them, with the directors. And Spike, he spent years and years in the military space program. And he went into the space program as an atheist and an evolutionist. And he left the space program as a Christian and a creationist. And I said, Spike, what happened? And he said, well, there was a Christian or creationist in that military space program. And he thought he was an idiot. Doesn't he know he can explain everything without God? And he started to challenge the Christian's foundation. And it withstood criticism because it was founded upon a rock. And then the Christian, or the creationist, started to challenge Spike's worldview. And it collapsed. It was founded on the sand. And I said, Spike, did he ask you any questions that made you stop in your tracks? Just made you stop and think? And he said, yeah. He asked me, how do you believe in the Big Bang and the laws of physics at the same time? They're not talking about that in your science textbook. I got your Earth Science book right here. They ain't talking about all the laws of physics that it breaks. They say it happens. But since it's not being taught in the classroom, guess what, folks? We're going to talk about it tonight. I have way more freedom to speak than your professor does. If he starts talking like this, he's going to get fired. Okay, let's talk about the law of causality. This is the law of cause and effect. Every effect has a cause. And every effect, or some of the effects, can never be greater than the cause. So I got a question. What caused the universe? If you haven't noticed, the universe is pretty big. This picture right here is from the Hubble Deep Field image. And it's just a grain of sand held at arm's length. That's the amount of sky they're looking at. And they zoom in on that. They look through our galaxy into the outer regions of the universe. There's only a few stars in that picture. They estimate there's 10,000 images of light, and only a couple of them, or a few of them, are stars. The rest are entire galaxies. And that's just from one sand grain of sky. Can you imagine how big the rest of the universe is? So whatever caused that universe has to be bigger than the universe. And that's what we're saying. We're saying a supernatural God can make a natural creation. You know, something outside the universe, outside the box, made the universe. A supernatural God can do this. It's like this building. Did this building put itself together? No, it had a builder. You know, my watch, it had a watchmaker. This computer, it had a designer. You know, the shirt on your back, how many people think that evolved? They found it in the rainforest, and it fits you, with the little label on the back with information. It's absurd to think the shirt on your back evolved. Well, how much more absurd is it to think that your body evolved, which is a gazillion times more complicated than your shirt. And so that's what we're trying to help people understand. Next, the first law of thermodynamics. This is a law that says matter and or energy can't be created or destroyed. Matter and energy can go from one form to the other, but it can't just pop into existence from nowhere. For example, you can get a little matter and a lot of energy in an atomic bomb. Or you can get a lot of energy in those particle accelerators, get those particles whipping around close to the speed of light, slam them into each other, and you get more particles than what you started. So you can go from matter to energy and energy to matter, but you can't just have it pop into existence. But that's not what they're telling the kids in the general eds. Look at this, that square at the bottom. The Big Bang Theory states that all the matter and energy in the universe exploded outward from a single point. Question, Where'd the matter come from? They don't tell them that it violates the first law of thermodynamics, do they? It just happened. Okay. And now I'd like to introduce you to Brian Young. He's got the Creation Instruction Association. He had a debate here at St. Cloud State. This was years and years ago. I saw it, and nice guy, really nice guy. But he was going to be given a talk at a university in Michigan, and a professor comes up to him and says, "You shouldn't even be here. You're taking your faith and your religion and you're passing it off as science and you're confusing the kids." I'm thinking, boy, that guy's not very tolerant to diversity of ideas now, is he? No, he's not very tolerant at all. But Brian says, "Sir, can I ask you a question?" And he says, "Sure." He says, "Sir, where did this subatomic particle that supposedly had all the matter and the whole universe in it, supposedly blew up 13.8 billion years ago, you call it a singularity, so where did that come from?" The professor says, "We don't know yet. Science has no explanation." "Oh, science has no explanation for where that particle came from?" "No, not yet." "Well, it sounds to me, sir, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you believe in that particle by faith." The professor didn't like hearing it, but it's true. He's believing in that particle by faith. There's no observational science of that at all. And this is what the scientists, the cosmologists, are saying. This is an open letter to the scientific community in 2004. The Big Bang today relies on a growing number of hypothetical entities, things that we have never observed. Inflation, dark matter, and dark energy are the most prominent examples. Without them, there would be fatal contradictions between the observations made by astronomers and the predictions of the Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory can't survive without these fudge factors. And then they go on to say this, and I think this is when they really hit the nail on the head. Today, virtually all financial and experimental resources in cosmology are devoted to Big Bang studies. Funding comes from only a few sources, and all the peer-reviewed committees that control them are dominated by supporters of the Big Bang. As a result, the dominance of the Big Bang within the field has become self-sustaining, irrespective of the scientific validity of the theory. And you could say the same thing about evolution. There's no funding going for intelligent design. There's no funding going for creation. It's all an atheistic worldview. And if you're only looking inside the box, that's all you're going to have. But I'm saying that there's something outside the box. And this was signed, and people who sign this put their job on the line. They really do. Signed by hundreds of scientists and researchers around the world. And they're talking about dark matter and dark energy, okay? They don't know anything about either one, but they have to have it for the universe to work in their model. So 75% of the universe is dark energy, 25% is dark matter, and they don't know anything about either one. And your theory of everything can't explain 96% of everything. Let that sink in. It's time to get a new theory. I like what this says. Christians get accused of believing things without evidence by people who believe in evolution, the Big Bang, the Oort cloud, dark matter, dark energy, inflation, all that's without evidence too. See, what I'm trying to say is we're both positions of faith. This isn't science versus religion. This is science built on one religion that acknowledges God versus science built on another religion which does not acknowledge God. And let the games begin. They're both either science or they're both either religion. So back when I was going to college, when I was in your shoes, there was 100% confidence in the Big Bang. And how old was the universe? 16 to 18 billion years old. And they didn't have any of those fudge factors. What is it today? Hey, the age of the universe shrunk. By 10%. Now it's 13.7 billion years. But they had to add inflation and dark matter and dark energy and string theory, otherwise it doesn't work. And they got, guess what, 100% confidence in that one too. What are they going to learn the next 20 years, 30 years? If they keep looking inside the box, they're going to be keeping adding and adding other things. The answer is outside the box. Okay, let's move on to the second law of thermodynamics. This is, the thermo means heat. Okay, second law of thermodynamics, technically it means that the amount of heat available for doing usable work in an isolated system is declining. Okay, think of this as a fire can't burn forever. It's going to run out of fuel. Stars can't burn forever. The previous one, the first law, was a rock can't make itself. It's layman's terms. Matter can't come into existence. And then Joe Lunchbach's definition of second law of thermodynamics is everything goes towards disorder, right? An isolated, things don't get more complicated on their own. I mean, just look at your room or your hair, whatever. Things left to themselves fall apart. Your car, everything. It's got to be maintained. But I got a question. If everything falls apart, according to that law, how did everything get so fine-tuned? Just search out fine-tuning the universe. And my favorite site is rsr.org, rsworldscienceradio.org. It's a pastor out in Denver, but he does a science show every Friday. He's very current, very up-to-date. He's probably got the most well-documented catalog of dinosaur soft tissues, dinosaur soft tissue discoveries on the internet. And secularists have even said that. But let's just take a look at one. And strong force, which if changed by 1%, would destroy all carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and heavier elements. So my question is, how did everything get so finely tuned from an explosion? Any of those things with gravity, the strong force, the weak force, the electromagnetic force, anything, only of those have been off just a little bit, it won't work. And so, how do you get something to organize itself? You know, and one of the greatest organizations is, how does it organize into a kayaker? You know, how do you organize into a human that violates the law? You know, things don't organize over time, they fall apart. So let's move on to the next law, Boyle's law. This has to do with star formation. When you got gas in a canister, and you make the canister smaller, the air pressure increases. Make the canister bigger, the air pressure decreases. That's basically Boyle's law. This is Gary Parker. Now he's got his bachelor's in biology and chemistry, a master's in biology and physiology, and then a doctorate in biology and geology. Okay, so he's very well educated. When he was in grad school, they were talking about how stars form. They call it the nebula theory. How this dust cloud called the nebula collapses on itself and ignites into a star. And he raises his hand and says, how does that happen? Because gas pressure far greatly exceeds, gravity, by 60 to 100,000 times greater than gravity. It's not going to collapse. And the professor just says, well, maybe we should call it the nebulous theory, meaning hard to understand, hard to see. But it's very interesting in listening to Gary Parker's testimony, because he was an atheist. Grew up as an atheist, he was an atheistic professor, and just for fun, he went to Pennsylvania for a vacation to interview for a job. And they paid him to go out there and interview at a Christian college. And he was shocked when they offered him the job. He says, hey, I'm not a Christian. They said, that's okay, just don't swear. And so he's teaching biology, this atheistic professor, teaching biology at this Christian college. And he thought it was his duty to get these ignorant Christians up to speed, and into the 21st century and stop believing in a book that's written by a bunch of goat herders. And he'd challenge their faith, and he'd have them crying in class. And a college professor, a chemistry professor said, hey, Gary, you want to come to a Bible study? And Gary says, why would I want to do that? I'm an atheist. He said, professor says, free coffee and donuts. Gary says, I'm there. So he went to the Bible study for a year and a half, and he gave his best arguments for evolution, and for a year and a half, his best arguments were soundly defeated. And he became a creationist and a Christian. And then he started to teach creation in his biology class, all right? And guess who got mad at him? The theology department. The theology department challenged him to a debate. And they said, we don't want you to have the underdog, sympathy, so find some more people to go with you. So we had the chemistry professor, and then another biology professor who was a creationist, and Gary versus the theology department. And they had creation versus evolution. And the science department, using the laws of science, was arguing for creation. And the theology department, using, I don't know what, it's not in the Bible, was arguing for evolution. Interesting concept there. And so let's listen to what he says in his own words, From Evolution to Creation, a personal testimony. He says, instead of challenging my creationist ideas, all the geology I was learning in grad school was supporting it. That's right. And then in geophysics, we went over all the assumptions that go into radiometric dating. Afterwards, the professor said something like this. If a fundamentalist ever got hold of this stuff, he would make havoc out of the radiometric dating system. So keep the faith. All right? There's problems with that atheistic worldview. And just think about this. This is the Crab Nebula. In the middle, those particles are bouncing up, bouncing into something, and bouncing down. They're bouncing all over each other in the middle. But what's happening on the edge here? When they bounce up, the very far edge, they just keep going. There's nothing to bounce into to bring them back. So there's another outer that's just like an onion, onion coming apart. This cloud is going to dissipate. It's not going to collapse. Stars can't form that way. But that's not what your science book says. This is an 8th grader science book. It says, a star forms inside a cloud of gas and dust called a nebula. Any critical thinking questions you could ask right now?
How do you know that?
How do you know that? Yeah, how do they know that a star forms like that? Has it ever been observed? No. How do they know that? But they're stating it as a fact. So these students are believing, well, that's what happens. And they're assuming that the textbook is reflecting what's in the scientific journals, and it's not. This is from a scientific journal. The silent embarrassment of modern astrophysics is that we do not know even how a single one of these stars managed to form. There's no lack of ideas, of course, we just can't substantiate them. Another one from Science. The formation of stars is one of the most fundamental problems in astrophysics. No current model can produce all of the observations. That's not quite true. It should say no current atheistic model can make all these things. There's one model that they've excluded. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and He made the stars also. And now this is the Hubble Deep Field. Before they had this image, they were predicting what they were going to see. They were thinking they were looking billions of years out into the universe, so that means they were looking into the past. And they thought they'd see all these infant stars and infant galaxies. And Bob Enyart says, no, I think you're wrong. We haven't been here billions of years. You're going to see the normal stars, the normal galaxies. And guess who was right? The scientists built on thinking inside the box, or the pastor who was thinking outside the box. The pastor was right. And this is the science news. Crisis in the cosmos? Why would there be a crisis in the cosmos? Well, they've looked deep into space and thus back in time when newborn galaxies filled the cosmos. They were thinking they'd see these infant galaxies and stars. Okay, but despite being only about 800 million years old, some of the infants are chock full of old stars. That can't happen according to their theory. Okay, so the science journals are not being reflected in the science textbook. Okay, the next law, the law of angular momentum, which says if something's spinning and it breaks apart, everything spins the same way. Why is that important? Because that's how they say the solar system formed. And that's a problem. Because we got Venus rotating backwards, we got Uranus rotating on its side, and again, this is what it says. According to the best scientific model, that should say according to the best atheistic model, because that's all they're showing you. It says there's a disk of whirling material. And up here it says most of the planets rotate on their axis in this direction. Well, according to the laws of angular momentum, they should all rotate in the same direction. So what do? They say, well, there was collisions that spun them backwards. Okay, that's what they always go to. But you got Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune have moons orbiting in both directions. How in the world is that going to happen? You got 8 of the, however many moons there are now, that rotate backwards. It doesn't work according to the laws of angular momentum. And not only that, that spin, okay, when it spins apart, most of the spin should be in the sun. That sun should be spinning like a top, and it's not. You know what's spinning like a top? Jupiter. Like every 10 hours or so, it's whipping around. That shouldn't happen according to the laws of angular momentum. And also, the planets don't go around the equator of the sun. It's off by 7 degrees. That's a huge problem too. And did you know that our moon doesn't go around the Earth's equator? Did you realize that? How many people saw the eclipse on that cloudy day in the rain? Okay, my brother went to Nebraska to watch it. But anyhow, our moon doesn't go around our equator, it goes around the orbit of the Earth. If it went around the equator, we'd hardly ever get a total solar eclipse. And Walt Brown has a theory about why the Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees. So if you come on October 19th, you're going to hear about that. Their theory supposedly can explain the 4 rocky planets near the sun, the 4 gas planets away from the sun, but Pluto's a problem, whatever you call it. Now it used to be a planet, now it's a dwarf planet. But this science book says, Pluto is an oddball rocky planet, is in the wrong place. They can't explain it. That nebula theory doesn't work. And this is what they found out past Neptune. They found Naiku. A team of researchers found a trans-Neptune object called Naiku orbiting the sun from a tilted plane and in the opposite direction. How in the world does that happen? And they can't go about the collision, because listen to this one. While Naiku could have easily been dismissed as just another collision victim, that's their rescuing device for everything. Additional findings have astronomers throwing that logic out the window and scratching their heads even more. They found that Naiku is not alone. Apparently Naiku is part of an entire group of objects orbiting the sun in this inclination and in this direction, the wrong way. They can't explain it inside the box. I'm saying God designed it that way. This is what your science books say. It's high school biology. The Earth began to form about 4.6 billion years ago and grew by colliding with space debris. Any critical questions we can ask? Critical thinking questions? Or are we just going to believe it? Who believes that that's a true statement? Probably pretty skeptical after showing you everything now. But yeah, have they ever observed it? How do we know this? Can you verify that? Are they making assumptions? And again, the biggest assumption is there's no God. And so let's take a look. And then in your science textbook right here, in this one, it talks about the Earth forming. Okay, the aggregation of nebular debris in a planet is a very violent process. Bodies ranging from the size of dust to small planets collide to create larger bodies. Okay, that's what they're telling the kids. Again, critical thinking statements. Because you assume that they're telling us what the science journals are saying, right? You assume this is the best information. But when we look in the scientific journals, what does it say? Well, and this is the theory, basically. Dust forms, and gas turns to dust, turns to pebbles, turns to rocks about this big. It turns into planetesimals. Those are the building blocks for planets. Those are kilometer-sized rocks, all right? The problem is it works up until here. Because once these rocks start slamming into each other, they break apart. Especially if they're moving thousands of meters per second. You know, just take a snowball or a mud ball and throw it and hit another mud ball. Is it going to stick, or is the dirt clump? It breaks apart. So there's a problem with that. And that's what the scientific journals are saying. This is in 2007 in Nature. How this process continues from meter-sized boulders to kilometer-scale planetesimals. It's a major unsolved problem. Are they telling that to kids in the general ed class? No. How about this journal? This is from Nature 2009. Objects must have grown very rapidly from sub-meter-sized pebbles into 100-kilometer-sized bodies, possibly in a single week. It's the only way it's going to work. Again, have you ever observed that? Can you verify that? Are you making any assumptions? Yeah, that there's no God. How about the law of biogenesis? This is a showstopper for an atheist. How in the world do you get life from non-life? Can't be done. There's not a scientific paper on the planet that explains how life comes from non-life. Okay, so how are we going to get kids to believe that life came from non-life? Because it has to happen according to that atheistic model. Well, they're going to show them the Miller-Urey experiment. Okay, keep in mind, this was done 50 or 60 years ago. And besides having the wrong starting material, the wrong process, and the wrong ending results, it was a great success. Okay, let's take a look at this. So basically, Miller-Urey, they got water vapor here, then they add a mixture of ammonia, hydrogen, and methane right up here, and then they zap it with electricity. And then it goes down, and this is a deceptive chart right here because there's a little trap here where they don't let those molecules go back through again because that spark's going to rip it apart. And so it makes amino acids. They say it's a building block for life, but building blocks don't mean life. Let's take a look at what this says here. The results were spectacular. They produced 21 amino acids, building blocks of proteins. Building blocks of proteins. Spectacular. Well, you can have parts for life, doesn't mean you have life. You can have all the parts for a car in a parking lot, that doesn't make a car. Unless it's assembled and has an energy source, it's just going to sit there. It's not going to drive away like a car should. And the same thing with our cells. You can have all the building blocks you want, but if nobody assembles them, then you're in trouble. Let's take a look at the energy source of a cell. Now keep in mind, how many people, if you open up your hood, would think, boy, that engine evolved by chance or random processes? No. It's got multiple parts working together with precision timing for a purpose. That's a clear sign of design, right? Let's take a look inside the cell.
It's been called one of the wonders of the molecular world, an amazing nanoscale machine. ATP synthase is a high-tech micromolecular power generator inside the cells of your body. It generates adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, an energy molecule that provides fuel that every one of your cells needs to function. Without this fuel, your cells will cease operation, and so will you.
So I got a question for the atheists. How did we live before that evolved? You know, without that fuel source, we're dead in the water, and dead things don't reproduce. And then take a look at these miraculously formed, intelligently designed.
The ATP synthase machine has many parts we recognize from human-designed technology. A rotor, a stator, a drive shaft, and other basic components of a rotary engine. The ATP synthase is one of thousands of elegantly designed molecular machines inside your cells that make your life and all known life possible. ATP synthase, an example of intelligent design.
But it's got a rotor, a stator, and all these other things that we use in the power plant, right? Right, Rick?
Yes.
We use that energy to generate electricity. You got that inside your cell. And that just came by chance, random process. You look at that, and that's clearly multiple parts working together with precision timing for a purpose, a clear indication of intelligent design. What does an atheist do with this? This is Francis Crick. All right, he's the guy who co-discovered the DNA molecule. He saw how marvelously complex it was. And what does he say? Biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they are seeing was not designed, but rather evolved. Why do you constantly have to keep that in mind? Because it sure looks like it's designed, doesn't it? But they don't have a designer inside their box. They don't have anybody to build that. So they have to, oh, it's just random processes. That's a huge leap of faith. But read that bottom sentence at the bottom. Because the ultimate aim of modern development of biology is, in fact, to explain all biology in terms of physics and chemistry, no God. So you can think in the box all you want, you just can't think of God. And that's why he's thinking that what we just saw in that video was not designed. Okay, you have to put your head in the sand not to see the design in it. Okay, but now let's take a look at this critique of this Miller-Urey experiment. This is Dr. Charles McCombs. He's got a doctorate in chemistry and a bachelor's in chemistry. He's been a researcher for 21 years, has 20 chemical patents. Do we have any doctors in chemistry, right? Doctorates of chemistry in here? All right, so we're going to take a look at what he says. He's critiquing this Miller-Urey experiment, and he's talking about chirality. Okay, proteins can form. We're going to have to explain chirality. Amino acids can form in two ways. One's called left-handed, one's called right-handed. Our hands are not identical, right? They're mirror images of each other. We got a right hand and a left hand. Okay, and that's what the same way with amino acids. And inside your body and all life, all amino acids, 100% are left-handed. Okay? When you die, then it goes back to a 50-50 mix. What did Miller-Urey create? 50-50 mix. He didn't make life. Okay, so this is what the doctor of chemistry says. How can random chance natural processes create proteins with thousands of left-handed molecules and then also create DNA with billions of right-handed? 100% right-handed, 100% left-handed. Chance natural processes can't do that. And then he says if one molecule in the DNA structure had the wrong chirality, that's the left-handedness, DNA would not exist in double helix form, the DNA would not function properly. The entire replication process would be derailed like a train on a bad railroad tracks. The reality of chirality, more than any other evidence, did more to convince me of the reality of an all-powerful creator. So what he saw in science led him to God. You see that? This amazing, amazing design in our body led him to the creator. And then he says, when we show evolutionists that the laws of natural science cannot explain the existence of chirality, the evolutionists say the process happened a long time ago by some unknown method that they cannot explain. Now who's relying on the supernatural explanation? And when I'm talking to people, I just want them to understand that evolution is faith, too. It's both faith. Except there's this faith in the unknown. Evolution is faith in the unknown. Unknown chemicals came together in an unknown way, in an unknown place, and at an unknown time, using unknown processes to produce people. I have faith in the Word of God than the supernatural God. I mean, which one is more logical faith? And then he goes on to say, evolution can give you a theory that might on the surface seem possible, but when true science gets involved and scientists start asking questions, the problems and false logic of the theory become apparent. This is why evolution just hopes you don't know chemistry. And there's an article, this is from the Scientific American. Don't tell creationists, but scientists don't have a clue how life began. Not a clue. And it goes through all the different theories and rips them apart. I edited that for time, but you can Google it on the internet. And this is what it says. I'll just give you a conclusion. Francis Crick again. Dissatisfied with conventional theories of life's beginning, Crick conjectured that aliens came to Earth in spaceship and planted seeds of life here billions of years ago. Any critical thinking questions we could ask Mr. Crick? How do you know that? Yeah. Has it ever been observed? Can you verify that? Are you making assumptions? And what's his biggest assumption? There's no God, right? See, he saw how marvelously complicated, complex it was, but it didn't lead him to God because he can't go to God. Remember, he's explaining everything in the material. So he believes in aliens. He's an alienist. Isn't that interesting? Never been observed. So he's got this theory out there called panspermia, which just punts the problem to another planet. Makes it worse, really. If it couldn't happen here, how could it happen there? Plus, now you got to have space travel involved, which is a lot more complicated. But that's the lengths of absurdity that they've gone to, because they've eliminated God. Okay, now 80 years ago, the president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science says, and they've changed their tune since then, but he says the probability of life originating from accident is comparable to the probability of an unabridged dictionary resulting from an explosion in a printing shop. It's never going to happen. And just lived roughly 30 or 40 years ago, Fred Hoyle, he's not a creationist, he says the chance that higher life forms might have emerged in this way, naturalistic way, is comparable with the chance of a tornado sweeping through a junkyard, assembling a Boeing 747 from the materials therein. See, it's not going to happen. But evolutionists will say, well, did you see all those galaxies out there? Did you see all those planets? It must have, even if the chances is really small, it's bound to have happened. Okay, Mr. Evolutionist, I want you to do a science experiment every time you do your laundry. Every time you open up the dryer. According to your theory, one of these times, somebody's going to get a dryer where everything's folded. And all the socks are paired up. Okay? According to your unlimited possibilities, probability, it ain't going to happen. I don't care how many planets there are. I don't care how many loads of laundry you do. Those socks are never going to be paired up when you open up that drawer. Open up that door. And it's so bad that, this isn't a Christian organization. This is the Origin of Life Project. They had $1 million on the table. Hey, just prove how the genetic code formed spontaneously. $1 million. It's on the table for 13 years. Nobody can do it. It's a showstopper. It's a big money pit that we're throwing tax dollars down. Just like the alien life thing. It's a big money pit. We could be using that money in better ways, for sure. But anyhow, so you have all these problems with life. So how are we going to get the college students, which are pretty sharp, how are we going to get them to believe that life came from non-life? Okay, well, we're going to show you. Page 516 of this book. It talks about to the best of our knowledge, again, I should say to the best of our atheistic knowledge, all right? They're not thinking outside the box. It's going to go through and all these problems with the Earth and against life. It's too hot. There's no ozone. We're getting bombarded with these rays from the sun. And then down here it says that it rained on the rock for millions of years. So basically that's why I said evolutionists, you believe you came from a rock, because it rained on the rock for millions of years, and that's part of your process. Okay, so all this stuff is just stacked against life. So how are we going to get the college student who's pretty sharp to believe that life came from non-life? We're going to use one very scientific word, just one. Okay, anybody know what it is? Can you see that? Oh, maybe it's too small. Let's blow that up again. See that? Somehow. Somehow, despite this harsh environment, living organisms appeared about 3.8 billion years ago. Somehow. Somehow is in a science book. Any critical thinking questions we could ask? How do you know that? Can you verify that? Has it ever been observed? Are you making assumptions? They're assuming there's no God? Somehow is a huge, fuzzy word. And this science book is full of fuzzy words, which implies they know what they're talking about, but they don't. Somehow, I like this comic here. Then a miracle occurred. And the guy says, I think you should have been a little more explicit here in step 2. And they throw this at creationists all the time. I'm throwing it right back at you, evolutionist. Somehow, I think you should have been a little more explicit there in paragraph number 4. Somehow. It's a faith-based statement right there. So anyhow, we're going from the origin of the earth to the first life with one word, somehow. And keep in mind, the atheist has their own Old Testament. It's called the Big Bang. And they've got their own New Testament. It's called the geologic column. And you go from the Old Testament to the New Testament, they do it with one word, somehow. Anybody see that Bill Nye Can't Ham debate? In the Q&A session was, how did consciousness come from matter? Bill Nye did answer, don't know. It's a mystery. That's right, because he looked inside the box. And then Can't Ham, when it's his turn, he says, Bill, I just want to let you know that there is a book that tells us where consciousness came from. Okay, now I'd like to introduce you to Jonathan Sarfati. He's a doctor of chemistry, he's a chess master. He could play 12 of you blindfold and beat you. Brilliant guy. Okay, what does he say? He says, the geology professor, a paleontologist, said explicitly, the fossil record does not support Darwinian evolution. Rather, it seems to support a series of divine creations. And that's true. Darwin was a conservative, if you will, because evolutionists got their own denominations. He was conservative. He said slow, gradual changes over a lot of time gives us what we have today. But they look at the evidence, and he says, we just don't know it. We haven't found enough fossils. That's why we don't see the transitional forms. Well, we found enough fossils 150 years later, and there's still no transitional forms. So Goldschmidt, he says, well, since there's no evidence, it must have happened quickly. He said all the mutations happened at once. The first bird came from a reptile egg. So he's pretty liberal. okay? And then Gould, he doesn't want to be as conservative as Darwin or as liberal as Goldsmith. He says, punctuated equilibrium. It happened in an isolation population that they captured in the fossil record. So how do you falsify this theory? Well, if they can't find evidence, it proves it. It's just amazing. But anyhow, this is what he says. Hydrolysis. Water plus polymers produces monomers. Okay, basically the theory goes that monomers, these are small molecules, they join together to polymers, bigger molecules. That's how you get life going. But water breaks them apart faster than it puts them together. And so Dr. Sarfati says, water is the worst place you're going to want to have life begin because water is going to destroy the molecules faster than it puts them together. So that prebiotic soup that they talk about goes against the laws of chemistry. Okay, and so just do some more research on that. They also said that life needs both sugars and amino acids. Unless they are kept apart, e.g. by the cell's architecture, they will react and destroy each other. Okay, see, chemistry is trying to destroy it. Biology is keeping chemistry from destroying it. When you die, then chemistry wins. Okay? We don't understand life, how that begins. And then there's a quote here from physicist Paul Davies. He's not a creationist, he's a premier evolutionist, but this is what he says. We know that the secret of life lies not with the chemical ingredients as such, but with the logical structure and organizational arrangement of molecules. Like a supercomputer, life is an information processing system. It is the software of the living cell that is the real mystery, not the hardware. Exactly right, the software. And guess what, folks? Information isn't in this box. Information is not material. And he goes on and says, where did it all come from? How did stupid atoms spontaneously write their own software? Nobody knows inside the box, but we know outside the box. There's a lot of problems for an atheist. Then he goes on to say there's no law of physics that's able to create information from nothing. So let's go on to information science. Our DNA is full of information. Books come from words, come from letters, they can be refined into Morse code, 3 symbols. Well, we come from proteins. And that came from amino acids, they come from nucleotides, 4 nucleotides. So let's just see where this information comes from. Werner Gitt is really, really good at this. All biological systems depend on information storage, transfer, and interpretation for their operation. Thus, the primary phenomenon that the theory of evolution must account for is the origin of biological information. Good question, Mr. Atheist. Where did all this information come from? I mean, we're passing mutations down every generation. Our good information is getting worse. Question, where did the good information come from? We don't see it getting better, we see it getting worse. A supernatural God can make it, but not according to evolution can, according to the law of entropy. Because information is non-material entity, its origin is likewise not explicable by natural processes. What causes information to come into existence at all? There's about 6 or 7 laws of information, but I'm just going to show you one, information science. Universal information can only be the product by an intelligent sender. So we've looked at the laws of science, and evolution is on the ropes. The ref's almost ready to stop it. It's staggering on. It's not standing up well to criticism. I encourage you to read this book in 6 days. 50 scientists talk about why they believe in creation, based on the laws of science. Okay, it's something that it won't be required reading in your biology book text or class. You're going to have to educate yourself. You're going to have to educate yourself on the other way of thinking, because you're not going to get it in class. You need to see both sides to think. If you don't see both sides, you're just memorizing and conforming. So I'm encouraging you to think. See both sides. And before we shut the book on the textbooks, let's take a look at this one paragraph. Like any scientific theory, evolutionary theory is constantly reviewed as new data are gathered. Researchers still debate important questions, such as precisely how new species arise and why species become extinct. That's valid. I got no problem with that. But get ready for this one. This is the understatement of the century. And there's also significant uncertainty about exactly how life began. Yeah, there sure is. That's a great understatement. But now look at how it winds up. However, any questions that remain are about how evolution works, not whether evolution occurred. So we got all these problems with life, but you don't look outside the box. Evolution is the way it is. There's no question about about whether it happened. Oh yeah, I got huge questions. We got 8 scientific law questions about how it happened. And then to the scientists, evolution is the key to understanding the natural world. Watch out for that. Because they're on the ropes, but they ain't going to go down slowly, so they're going to start saying a bunch of catchphrases and hope that it works. Distraction. Evolution is the foundation for science. Anybody ever heard that? Well, is it really? You know, Bill Nye, who asked Ken Ham, how can you use a cell phone and get on a jet plane and not believe in evolution? Because he thinks that's all the same science. Well, no, evolution's got nothing to do with the cell phone. Evolution's got nothing to do with the jet plane. You know, these are the laws of physics in action. Evolution isn't laws of physics. It's an unsubstantiated conjecture about the past. Basically, it's a fancy way of guessing about the past. There's no evidence for it at all. So is evolution really the foundation for science? Well, let's take a look where science began. The who's who of science, the scientific revolution, was in a Christian culture. They looked for the laws of science because they figured that God was a God of order, so we should be able to find out how he ordered things. And we came up with calculus and chemistry and computer science and electromagnetics and genetics. This is the who's who. Louis Pasteur, Newton, Kepler, Babbage, Faraday, the who's who. And I saw a debate one time. Yeah, but they just didn't understand. They lived so long ago, they don't know what we know. We think we're pretty arrogant, and you know, to think we know more than Newton. Come on now. And then also this one, oceanography. Matthew Murray, because of the Bible, he founded oceanography. Because in Psalm 8:8 it says there's paths in the sea. And he said, well, if God says there's paths in the sea, I'm going to find them. And he found the ocean currents. Saves the shipping industry billions of dollars. Because he took some idea that God said and he applied it to the natural world. But yet how sad is it that we don't even allow God in the science room? Isn't that sad? During that debate, we rented a room over at the library and we packed it. Bill Nye versus Ken Ham. We had all the chairs filled. We got all the chairs from the next classroom and filled them. We were starting to get chairs from the lobby to fill them. People were interested in this idea. They want to see both sides. In the classroom, you're only seeing one side. People are thirsting for knowledge. They want to think, but the professor won't let them think. So again, you're going to have to educate yourself. And I thought it was brilliant what Ken Ham did. Ken Ham, in his opening statement, because Bill Nye, we got to teach evolution, or we're going to fall behind the other countries as far as innovators and inventors. That's the altar call for an atheist or an evolutionist. We have to teach evolution, or the sky's going to fall. Our technology's going to fall apart, and that's not true. So I love what Ken Ham did. He showed him this.
Hi, my name is Dr. Raymond Damadian. I am a young Earth creation scientist and believe that God created the world in 6 24-hour days, just as recorded in the book of Genesis. By God's grace and the devoted prayers of my godly mother-in-law, I invented the MRI scanner in 1969. The idea that scientists who believe the Earth is 6,000 years old cannot do real science is simply wrong.
Simply wrong. And Bill Nye saw that at the beginning of the debate, but he kept on doing that altar call. I can't stress how important it is that we teach evolution. You know the interesting thing about Robert Damadian? He invented the MRI. He's got the first patent on the MRI. Did he get the Nobel Peace Prize or the Nobel Prize for the MRI? No. They could give it to 3 people, and they gave it to 2, and they excluded him. Read A Gifted Mind. It's an amazing book. Amazing book. What he went through to build that thing, it was only by God's grace. I mean, there was one time where he needed 150,000 feet of titanium wire, and it went for like $10 a foot or something. He needed $150,000 or $1 a foot. He needed $150,000 to get that, to make that magnet. And then he talked to somebody from Westinghouse and said, we're getting out of the industry. We'll give it to you for 10 cents on the dollar. So he got it for $15,000, and that's all the money he had. That's the money he had saved up. And then he told his parents-in-law, his mother and father-in-law, they said, we've been praying for you. And then he started looking, because he was a Christian and went off to atheism, and then he said, wow, there really is a God. And he became a prominent speaker on creation, and so he didn't get the Nobel Prize. Very tragic situation that is, because evolutionists, they get their same witch hunts. You better toe the total line, or you're not going to get the funding, you're not going to get the awards, you're not going to get your degrees, you're not going to get into grad school, you're not going to get the Rhodes Scholarship. And if you don't believe me, let's talk after you read this book, Slaughter of the Dissonance. We'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, so what inventions were, what did evolution have to do with any of these inventions? The biogenesis law, the electric generator, the electric motor, the law of gravity, the scientific method, the airplane, the MRI. Evolution has nothing to do with any of that. So again, Mr. Nye, how far did we fall behind the other countries when a creationist invented the MRI? He knows that, but he's still doing that same altar call. He's just hoping other people don't know that. So what does this person say? Our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense. Yeah, if you think he came from the rock, that's against common sense. is the key to understanding the real struggle between science, and what they mean there is evolution, and the supernatural. We take the side of science, in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs. Tolerance for the scientific community for unsubstantiated just-so stories, because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. Just-so stories. Yeah, we came from aliens. It's a just-so story. No matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated, moreover, that materialism is absolute. We cannot allow a divine foot in the door. So they're really doubling down on this materialistic worldview, even if all the data points somewhere else. And this guy said, you know, in fact, evolution has become, in a sense, a scientific religion. And I could make that argument. I don't have time, though. Almost all scientists have accepted it, and many are prepared to bend their observations to fit within it. Let's do a quick survey here. How many people think that a scientist would bend their observations to fit the theory? Anybody? Okay. All right. We did a talk called Who's Your Daddy? SCSU Who's Your Daddy is on YouTube. We went through the laundry list of lies that evolutionists have promoted to the public. We're just going to pick one. All right? Lucy. We've all heard of Lucy, our supposed ape-like ancestor. Look at what this textbook says. A remarkably complete skeleton. Remarkably complete. Just close your eyes and picture, we got 206 bones in our body. What do you think remarkably complete is? Maybe 180 or so? Remarkably complete? How about this one? It's nearly complete. That's probably like almost all of them, maybe 200, right? But take a look up here. Australopithecus afarensis most definitely walked upright. Okay, down here. They most definitely walked upright. Okay, this is our general ed textbook right here. You're paying $130 for this book. Okay, should we believe what it says? How many people believe that Lucy walked upright? It's in the textbook. All right? Yeah, this is a good thing. All right? Well, let's go back to the skeleton. A nearly complete skeleton. Is that nearly complete? Like 40-some bones. Is that nearly complete? No. How can they say that in the textbooks? Are they lying to the students to make them think they have more evidence than what they have? Nearly complete? Remarkably complete? That's not nearly complete. That's a lie. I don't know how else to say it, but that's a lie. Okay, now notice the feet and notice the hands. How many bones do we have of any of those? The feet and the hands? Nothing. So what do we do on the display at the St. Louis Zoo? Here's Lucy. Okay, human feet, human hands, whites in the eyes. They don't have any evidence for that at all. But you need Lucy to have an ape-like ancestor, right? You gotta have something to people to think we came from monkeys. And now let's take a look. Do you know what they did? Let's check out her hip right here. Okay. How many people think that Lucy's hip was a human hip? How many think it was a chimp hip? Well, this is our tax money at work. Here's Nova.
A Nova miniseries over 3 nights, In Search of Human Origins.
I showed this to 2 anthropologists today. They're taking an anthropology class. I talked to anthropology majors, and they got no idea what they did to Lucy's hip. They don't believe me. So I show them. It's like, well, I'm going to have to talk to my professor about that. I was hoping the professor would show up tonight.
Superficially, her hip resembled a chimpanzee's, which meant that Lucy couldn't possibly have walked like a modern human.
So her hip looks like a chimp, but she can't walk upright. That's a problem for an evolutionist.
But Lovejoy noticed something odd about the way the bones had been fossilized.
When I put the 2 parts of the pelvis together that we had, this part of the pelvis has pressed so hard and so completely into this one that it caused it to be broken into a series of individual pieces which were then fused together in later fossilization.
Fused together in later fossilization? I mean, your bones will fuse together when it's alive. They'll heal themselves. When you're dead, why are they going to join again? But it's interesting. I mean, it fit perfectly as a chimp hip. But you ain't going to get TV time and sell T-shirts by finding monkey bones. You got to find the ancestor, ape-like ancestor, to make the big leagues.
After Lucy died, some of her bones lying in the mud must have been crushed or broken, perhaps by animals browsing at the lakeshore.
This has caused the 2 bones, in fact, to fit together so well that they're in an anatomically impossible position.
For a human, not a chimp. Gets that. It's anatomically impossible for a human, but if Lucy's a chimp, there's nothing anatomically impossible about it.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's.
The perfect fit was an illusion because it looks like a chimp, okay? If I told you what they did, you wouldn't believe it. So I'm going to show you what they did to change Lucy's hip from a chimp to a human.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
Well, I hope so. If you adjust it, cut apart the parts you don't want, it better look like you want it to look. So did the scientists adjust the theory to fit the evidence, or did they manipulate the evidence to fit the theory? And we go through a whole lot of that, and I mean, they did that with the Piltdown Man, Nebraska Man, Haeckel's drawings. There's a lot of things that they promote, because you can't use the truth to promote a lie. You have to lie to promote a lie. And evolution is a lie. We didn't come from nothing. You're not mutated animals. You made in the image of God. And this is Dr. Carl Werner. He falsified evolution twice. Twice. He said that if evolution is false, he was an evolutionist, and a classmate challenged him to prove evolution. And so when he got funding, when he was older and he had the resources and the money to do it, he came up with in science you don't prove something, you falsify it. Okay, and so he said that if evolution is false, modern animals should look just like their fossil ancestors. And guess what? That's what he found. Those things look identical, wouldn't you agree? But what did the scientists call them? Different genes, different species, different genes, different species. Okay? And so, and if you want to see more of this, we really dive into this. And in the last Evolution versus Science talk, we go into that. And then he falsified it again. He says, if evolution is false, we should find mammals with the dinosaurs. Because, mammals shouldn't have been around back then. And what did they find? They found all three groups of fish living today with the dinosaurs. They found both major amphibian groups living today. All four reptile orders living today. Most of all bird orders living today. And all three types of mammals living today. So they found everything. The geologic column is a sign of a flood. It's not a sign of evolution. And we go into that later. And so now we're going to close the textbook on close the textbooks. But evolutionists don't quit. Okay, so you have to watch out for logical fallacies that they're going to throw at you. We talked about changing the meaning of the word, bait and switch. Well, you believe that dogs evolved, therefore you believe that molecules turn into man. No, that's different types of evolution. And also reification. The evidence speaks for itself, and it says evolution. Evidence doesn't speak at all. It's interpreted. Okay, when personal attributes it'd be like, don't mess with, not nice to fool with Mother Nature. Or Father Time never loses. Or evolution figured a way out. Evolution doesn't figure anything. Nature selects individuals. No, it doesn't select. It's just there. Doesn't science prove evolution is true? We need to understand that science doesn't do anything. Scientists, however, they look at the data and they interpret the evidence based on what they believe. If they believe there's no God, they're going to interpret it that way. And then they go out and write the textbooks and the science books and design our museums and write our encyclopedias, and everywhere you look, it's evolution, 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 because that's what they believe. Okay, for example here, scientists can put a man on the moon, all right? But scientists can't prove how the moon got there. Evolutionists don't have a clue how the moon got there. They got four theories, none of them work. They got the fission, the nebular, they got the capture, and the collision, and none of them work. They can't even explain the moon. We're supposed to think they can tell us how life began? Okay, another one. So then they'll appeal to the majority. Well, everybody believes in evolution. Well, for one thing, that's not how you determine truth. All right? Everybody can be wrong. And even still, it's not true anyway. This top line here, this is a Gallup poll, the latest one, 2017. The top line there is the amount of Americans that believe that God made man in his present form less than 10,000 years ago. So most of the people don't believe in evolution, all right? The second line is that man evolved with God's help. And the third line, way down at the bottom, less than 1 in 5, what's being taught in the textbooks? Atheistic evolution. Okay, most people don't believe that, so they're appealing to the majority, they're wrong. So then they'll say, well, most of the science, nearly all the scientists believe this, that are appealing to authority. And again, that's not how you determine truth. Most of the scientists used to believe that the sun went around the earth, and they were wrong. Most of the scientists used to believe that life came from non-life and spontaneous generation. They were wrong. Most of the scientists believed that if you were sick, you could take out the bad blood, and you get better. Take blood out of this arm, you better take some out of that arm, otherwise you're going to be out of balance. And they were wrong. And they used to believe that you didn't have to wash your hands after doing an autopsy. Okay? And you go and deliver babies, and they were wondering why they were dying, and they were wrong. And people who said they were wrong got put, they weren't rewarded for that. They were like frowned upon. And so, and again, they'll say nearly all the scientists believe it. Well, you better believe it, or you're going to lose your job. We talked about this. Again, read this book, or that movie. Expelled, no intelligence allowed. Dr. Jerry Bergman, that's what happened to him. He was an evolutionist, and then became a creationist, and he lost his job. And people started sending him stuff, and that happened to me too, so he made a volume. He's got another volume. He says he's going to have 5 or 6 volumes when he's done. He's got 6 file cabinets full of people that have been persecuted because they don't have freedom to think. The government institutions don't allow this diversity of thought. You got to think one way. You got to think inside the box, or things get ugly for you. And I'm just going to use one example. Dr. Gonzalez. Notice this. He had 68 peer-reviewed journals. 68. What does he need for tenure at Iowa State? About 15. So he's super qualified. And he's got good stuff because it's been cited 1,500 times. So he's a top-notch scientist. What happened? He wrote The Privileged Planet. From a scientist, he just looked at the Earth and thought, man, all these things have to be perfect for life to be here. And he looked at where we were in the solar system and the galaxy and said, the perfect place for life is also the perfect place to make discoveries. And that's the big gist of The Privileged Planet. What do the atheists think? No, we're just a random chance product. We're just like any other, pale blue speck. They had a big brouhaha over that because he scientifically said the obvious. Guess what happened to them? They denied him tenure. Isn't that sad? You don't have diversity to think at Iowa State. You better think inside the box or you're out of here. Isn't that sad? Also, there are scientists, from Answers of Genesis and Institute for Creation Research and Creation Research Society that are doing creation work. So then watch out for the next logical fallacy. It's the no true Scotsman fallacy, which comes from no Scotsman puts sugar in his porridge. But Agnes, he's a Scotsman, he puts sugar in his porridge. And they go, yeah, but no true Scotsman puts sugar in his porridge. So no true scientist would believe in evolution. So it's arbitrary. Watch out for that one. Okay, and it's not true anyway. Because you go into dissentfromdarwin.org, you have to be a PhD scientist and above to put your name on this list. And they're basically agreeing that we are skeptical of the claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence for Darwinian theory should be encouraged. Basically, they doubt Darwin. Okay, they put their name on that list, and they can, I know a couple. Rod Stadler, he's at the Twin Cities Creation Science Association. His name's on here, and he couldn't get his book advertised in the scientific journal. It was just a book on science, but it was really neat how he did it. He said that you got high confidence science, which is double-blind science, where you eliminate all bias, and it's observable and testable and repeatable high confidence science, and low confidence science, where it's unobservable beliefs about the past. And so he decided and he couldn't get he had it all set up, but then it got shut down. And again, these are from every biochemistry, chemistry, genetics, every field of study from all around the world, public and private universities all around the world. They doubt Darwin. Okay, but then you got to watch out for begging the question. This is where you assume something to be true in your answer. And Bill Nye and Ken Ham, they got together after round 2 at the Ark. You can see this on the internet. And Ken Ham asked Bill Nye, what evidence do you have for evolution? And Bill Nye says, here we are. And I wish Ken Ham would have said, two could play that game. You know what the best evidence for creation is? Here we are. It's arbitrary. So watch out for that. They're assuming something to be true. Also the straw man. That's where they'll misrepresent your position and then destroy it. You know, you can't get all the species of the animals on the ark. The ark can't be big enough for all those millions of animals or whatever. Well, that's not our position. We're not saying every species was on the ark. We're saying every kind was on the ark. You don't need the horse, donkey, and the zebra. You just need the horse kind. You don't need the wolf, dog, and coyote. You just need the dog kind. They're misrepresenting our position, and then they rip it apart. So watch out for that. And then also circular reasoning, which is prominent in the dating game. Okay, they use the rocks to date the fossils, and the fossils to date the rocks. If you go to the geologist and ask him how old this layer is, he says, well, it's so many million years old. And you say, how is that? He says, because it's got that index fossil in it. So then you go to the paleontologist and you say, how old is this index fossil? And they'll say, it's so many years old. You say, how do you know that? He says, it's because it's in that rock layer. So that's how they do the dating. You can't radiometric date sedimentary rock. That's kind of a shocker to some people. And then we go to ad hominem attacks, okay? This is when they don't have anything logical to say. This happens quite a bit on social media. It gets there pretty fast. When somebody doesn't have anything logical to say, they'll attack the person who's saying it. If that ever happens to me, I take it as a compliment. That means my argument's sound enough they can't attack it. All right? So when an argument is directed against the person rather than his position, the irony here is obvious. Secular scientists censor creation research, then they mock creation scientists for not publishing in secular research. I got a table full of peer-reviewed creation research magazines in the front if you want to look at them. And with this one guy, Richard Sternberg, and you can see this on Expelled, he was the editor for a magazine out of the Smithsonian. And an intelligent design guy submitted a paper. He thought, well, yeah, let's have this debate. Let's publish it, and if it's bad science, let's rip it apart scientifically, but if it's good science, let's follow the evidence wherever it goes. Good science, right? Follow the evidence wherever it goes. He published it. They called him an intellectual terrorist, and they fired him. And I'm thinking, intellectual terrorist, that's kind of strong, isn't it? But then I started to think, our founding fathers, Declaration of Independence, they were creationists. We are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Our rights come from God, can't be taken away. Okay, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But hey, if the government schools can get rid of God and the science rule, guess what? Now the government's put themselves in the position of God. Intellectual terrorist. He's getting in the way of government becoming God. And that's a scary place to be, folks. I mean, just look at godless countries, godless regimes, communist China, communist Russia, Nazi Germany. They invented a whole new word because of what happened last century. It's called democide. The murder of citizens by the government. 250 million citizens were murdered by their government. And that's what can happen if there's no God. Get rid of the useless eaters. They're not made in the image of God. If you're just a mutated animal, why not kill them? And you saw the looting that's happening in Miami, or in Florida. You saw that on Facebook, whatever, these people looting the store. My question is, hey, if evolution's true, what's wrong with stealing? If evolution's true, why not steal if it enhances your survivability? If we're just mutated animals, well, I'm here to tell you tonight, you're not a mutated animal. You're made in the image of God, and this God loves you. And that's why we're putting all this stuff together for the message at the end. But we got those creation journals here. Come and check them out. And I like what one guy said, let the games begin. They won't let us play in their journals, won't let us publish theirs, so we have our own journals. So let's see who does better science. They might have the money and the facilities and the research and the grants and stuff, but they have the faulty foundation. They're looking inside the box for the answers and they're never going to find them. They have creationists, we got the truth, and not as much funding, but we're doing better science. We didn't believe that it was junk DNA. The atheists said, don't even look for purposes for it. It's junk, left over from all our mutations. The creationists said, no, that doesn't make junk. And there is purpose for that DNA. And so a sign of good science is it can make good predictions. Okay, whenever they go by a planet for the first time, evolutionists are always shocked because it goes against their evolutionary theory billions of years. But here's the guy who predicted. This is Russell Humphreys, back in 1984. He accurately made a prediction about Uranus and Neptune, their magnetic fields. No spaceship had ever been out there. And he predicted it based on a 6,000-year-old solar system. And he was spot on. The evolutionists were off. They were way off. He did the same thing with Mercury. He said that Mercury's field should be declining once they found out that it had it. They said, no, it should be stable after billions of years. They went by it again, and guess what? It was declining. And they also, the RATE team, radioisotopes and the age of the Earth, they did this prediction for zircon crystals. How much helium would be in these crystals? And they know how fast they escape from the crystal, and they made two graphs. The bottom one was that this rock is billions of years old. This is how much helium we'd expect to find in the crystals. And then they made the top one. If this rock is 6,000 years old, this is how much helium we'd expect to find in the zircon crystals. And guess where the data fell? Perfectly on the 6,000-year model. That should open up some eyes in the scientific community. This is a good model. It does good science. It makes good predictions. All right? And now we're going to just wrap up with a couple of things real quickly. What's happening in geology? Anybody ever heard of Xerxes? Okay, this is off of Iceland. In 1963, there was an island that began to form from a volcanic eruption. And what does it look like today? This is 50 years later. Look at that. You know, if you were born before 1963, you're older than the hills. Literally, older than those hills. Okay, and look at this. Did it take millions of years for that river to cut the canyon? No, I don't think so. And this is what they say, New Scientist in 2007. About Xerxes says, geographers marvel that canyons, gullies, and other land features that typically, or allegedly, take tens of thousands or millions of years to form were created in less than a decade. So all these things that we think take a long time can be done rapidly. That's geology. Now this is biology. I heard Dr. Galusa speak a couple of months ago down at Northwestern, the Twin Cities Creation Science Association. And he's a doctor who also has an engineering degree, so he's very sharp. And he talks about these sensors that are built into the animals to help them to adjust to their environment quickly. He talked about gulls. Gulls can live on the sea because they've got these glands above their eyes that filter out the salt. Those same gulls go to fresh water, those glands disappear. They go to salt water again, those glands appear. So there's a sensor inside the bird that God designed inside the bird to adapt to the different environments. And then he talked about grasshoppers that have sensors on their back feet. If they get bumped too much, they're going to sprout wings and fly away as locusts. He talked about road beetles. They can morph their bodies to look like army ants. They smell like army ants and they act like army ants and they get inside the anthill and then they eat all the larvae and the eggs. They just have a buffet. Okay, and I guess they do it for termites. He talked about how scientists, they do experiments on mice. They raise them on a hot pad, and the next generation of mice are more suited to live in the heat. There's another experiment where he talked about where they spray cherry scent on the mice, and then they zap them with electricity. Cherry scent and zap, cherry scent and zap, cherry scent and zap. And the next generation of mice, their senses for cherry scent are highly developed. Okay, so there's something we don't quite understand about biology. And then he talked about how he read this paper by an atheist that he talked about how when alligators lay their eggs in the sand, if the sand is a certain temp, at a certain time, they all hatch female. If it's a different temp at a certain time, they all hatch male. And he's given glory to the environment, communicating to the alligators, to get the right balance. And Dr. Galusa says, no, I predict that there's sensors in the eggs that sense the temperature and switch it. And a year and a half later, his prediction was made right. Give glory to God for the sensors that they're put in there. Then he talked about these blind cave fish. These are fish that are in a cave. They don't have any eyes, they don't have any pigment, but their sense of smell and of touch is highly developed. So how long does it go from a fish with eye and pigment to a fish with no eyes and no pigment? Well, the evolutionary story is these fish got trapped in a cave. And in a cave, eyes aren't a benefit because you can't see. Actually, they're a hindrance because if you scratch them or poke them, they could get infected and you could die. So countless generations go by, and then there's a mutation. There's a fish that doesn't have eyes. So his ability to survive is just a little bit better than everyone else's. And his offspring is just a little bit better than everyone else's. But that little bit over a long period of time is significant because that's all that's in the cave right now. They're all descendants from that blind cave fish. All right? So critical question is, how do we know this? Has it ever been observed? Can you verify that? You know what? It has been observed. And you know how many generations it takes? It's not 4 million or 4,000 or 400. 4. In 4 generations, you can go from eyes and pigment to no eyes and no pigment. And I asked him in the Q&A session, I said, what happens to these blind cavefish when they're brought back into light? Do they get their eyes back? And Dr. Galusa said he didn't know. He didn't know if they did the experiment. But in doing research for another talk, blind cavefish can see again. Offspring that can see. So how many generations did it take for a blind cavefish with no eyes and no pigment to get eyes? It'll shock you. Look at this. It's a miracle. Blind cavefish, despite having adapted to their lightless environment for more than 1 million years, again, can you verify that, can produce sighted offspring in just a single generation. A single generation. Well, I'm going to make a prediction. My assumption, and I'm just guessing, I don't know this, but I'm guessing, because they took 2 fish from different caves and they brought them together. I'm guessing that they did that in the lab, not in the cave. And so I'm making a prediction. This is September 11th, 2017. I'm making a prediction that there's sensors in the fish when they're developing that can sense what environment they're in. And if they need eyes in that environment, they're going to get eyes. And if they don't need eyes in that environment, their eyes are going to disappear. So we'll see if that prediction makes sense. I'm not a scientist, but I think that God's done something that the evolutionists don't have a clue about. They got together in Europe last November to try and figure out how to explain this, and they can't explain it. I'm thinking this could be the straw that breaks evolution's back. Every false paradigm eventually crumbles. Maybe this is what's going to make it crumble. And so we just inform people. Okay, now to wrap this all up, we looked at the laws of science, and evolution is lacking. You believe in miracles. Okay, when you define yourself inside the box, you have to believe the laws of science don't work. The next thing is we looked at logical fallacies. Okay, watch out for them in these discussions. Don't let the evolutionists get away with them. Then we looked at critical thinking skills. All right, these are questions I hope you use in the rest of your life. How do you know that? Can you verify that? Has this ever been observed? Are you making assumptions? All right, and this is, don't be absurd. Nobody made us. We evolved from chance, by chance from snowflakes. That's government education, folks. That's just absurd. Evolutionism, the belief that hydrogen and helium eventually turn into people. How do we know that? Can it be verified? Is there an assumption? Yeah, there are assumptions there's no God. And this is the last scientist the last scientist I want to introduce you to. George Washington Carver. He was born a slave and became a world-renowned scientist because he figured out what to do with the peanut. Okay, and he was invited to Congress. He was going to speak in front of Congress. They were going to give him 10 minutes to talk about how the peanut was good for the Southern economy. He spoke for 2 hours. And finally, the chairman said, Dr. Carver, how did you learn all these things? And Dr. Carver said, from an old book. What book was that? He said, the Bible. He said, does the Bible tell you about peanuts? He said, no, sir. It tells me about the God who made the peanut. I asked him to show me what to do with the peanut, and he did. Can you imagine if we had scientists looking to God for guidance with all our facilities and technology, what we could do? Well, we kick it to the curb. And I'd like to close with this. George Washington himself, his last words, they bled him twice, gave him a shot of mercury, and that's why he was going to die. And he told them his last words were, doctors, I'm dying, but I'm not afraid to die. My question is, how about you? Are you afraid to die? And with that, David's going to give you the best message of the
Jesus said in John 3, he said, you must be born again. He said to Nicodemus, if you except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Look with me to John chapter 3. Look over there with me, would you? John chapter 3. I love this. Pharisee Nicodemus comes to the Lord by night. He kind of wanted to be secretive. Probably didn't want the press to see him. So he came by night. That was a joke, by the way. Probably wasn't a lot of the press back then. Came by night, oh, master, verse 2. Rabbi, we know that thou art a teacher come from God, for no man can do these miracles that thou doest except God be with him. Jesus didn't say, hey, thanks for the compliment, Nick. Now let me explain to you how I did those things. You know what he does? Jesus goes right to the issue. Now this was a self-righteous man. He did live a moral life, and praise God for people who do live a moral life. We're glad about that. But friend, do not mistake thinking that living a moral life is going to get you into heaven, because it won't. This man lived a moral life, but Jesus cuts to the chase. And what does he tell him in chapter 3, verse 3? Jesus answered and said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. We need to evangelize the lost. But you know what? There are Christians who will say, yeah, that's important. But you know what? I'm going to give large sums of money to this whatever political party, because I think that's where the change has to come. No, first and foremost, it has to be on the inside. Yet this is the hard work. But this is the work that's the most profitable, isn't it? Verse 16, For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. He that believeth on him is not condemned. He that believeth not is condemned already. Why? Because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. What is it you need to believe about Jesus Christ? Just believe he was a man of history? No, no, no. More than that. More than that. Jesus, I jumped to verse 16, but before verse 16, Jesus gave Nicodemus an illustration from the Old Testament, which was a type or a picture of him. Nicodemus knew exactly what Jesus was talking about. What was it he needed to believe? Okay, look up here. It's representing you and me, and let my wallet represent our sin. We're all sinners. All of us, everybody in the room, including me. God loves us. He hates our sin, but he loves us. To get to heaven, we have to be sinless in the eyes of God. We need his very own righteousness to get into heaven. You know, there are some people who live a moral life, but they're not as righteous as God. God says you have to be as righteous as I am. See, living a moral life is like if the pages of my Bible are a lifetime of good works. It's like putting all those good works on there. I've lived a moral life, but the sin's still there. The sin has to be gone. If we are to pay for our sin, we'll spend forever suffering for it. God says, no, I love you so much, I am going to come to your rescue. And that is what Jesus Christ did. This represents him, sinless. Jesus came into the world. Okay. Verse 17, For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world. Why? Already condemned. But that the world through him might be saved. What did he do? He went to the cross and he paid, friend, he paid for all of your sin, all of it. Even what you haven't even done yet, he paid for that. He was buried, and 3 days later came back from the dead. And the Bible says this, that whosoever believeth, that means you put your faith, your trust in him, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Look up here. When you put your faith in Jesus Christ as your Savior, the payment he made is good on your behalf that moment. Your sins are forgiven. He gives you everlasting life, and he gives you his righteousness. If you were as righteous as God, could you go to heaven? Yes. Yeah. How do you get this forgiveness? By simply trusting in Christ that he made that payment for you. And by the way, this is the difference between heaven and hell. How do you know that? Verse 18, He that believeth on him is not condemned, but he that believeth not is condemned. Look at that. Already, because he has not believed. So it isn't, you're condemned already because you haven't done enough good works. No, it's because you haven't believed. Because good works will not save. Good works will not take away the sin.